There are moments when a person does not realize how close they came to losing something precious, not because God abandoned them, but because fear, exhaustion, disappointment, and silence slowly convinced them to let go. And if you open this message at a moment when your heart feels tired, confused, or distant from the peace you once carried, listen carefully. This is not a message telling you that heaven is about to erase your name. Your name is not written in God's love with disappearing ink. But there may be something slipping through your hands right now, your trust, your hope, your willingness to believe that your life can still change. And that is why this moment matters. Not because 10 seconds remain before God turns away, but because 10 seconds can be enough to make a decision. 10 seconds can be enough to stop running. 10 seconds can be enough to say, God, I am still here. 10 seconds can be enough to realize that the hand you thought you had lost may still be reaching toward you. So do not rush through this. Do not listen with only your ears. Listen with the part of you that has been carrying questions nobody else knows. Because before this message ends, you may recognize something surprising. The season that made you believe God had become distant may actually have revealed how deeply you were being carried. And the truth you are about to hear may change the way you understand every delay, every closed door, every unanswered prayer, and every moment you thought you had been forgotten. Archangel Michael is often remembered as a symbol of courage, protection, and spiritual strength. But courage is not always a loud battle. Sometimes courage is getting out of bed when your heart is heavy. Sometimes courage is refusing to become bitter after being disappointed. Sometimes courage is choosing not to give up when you cannot see what comes next. And sometimes the greatest battle is not against something outside you. It is against the voice inside you that says, God has left me. It is too late for me. I have made too many mistakes. My name no longer matters. If that voice has been speaking to you, do not accept it as the final truth. Because pain can speak loudly without speaking accurately. Fear can create convincing stories. Loneliness can make silence feel like rejection. And disappointment can make a temporary season look like a permanent ending. But a feeling is not always a prophecy. A delay is not always a denial. And a difficult chapter is not proof that God has removed His hand from your life. There is something important you need to understand. You do not lose God's hand because you had a difficult day. You do not lose God's love because you asked questions. You do not become invisible because you became tired. You are not erased because you struggled. You are not forgotten because you fell. The moment you think you are too far away may be the moment you finally stop pretending that you can carry everything alone. And that honesty can become the beginning of a deeper connection. So stay with this message. Because the next part may reveal why the very thing you thought was pulling you away from God could become the reason you return to yourself with greater clarity than before. Imagine someone walking through a storm at night. The wind is loud. The road is unclear. The person cannot see more than a few steps ahead. After walking for hours, they begin to wonder whether they are moving in the right direction. Then they look down and notice something unexpected. A hand is holding theirs. Not tightly enough to force them. Not violently enough to frighten them. Just firmly enough to guide them. But because the storm is so loud, they had almost forgotten the hand was there. Many people live this way. They become so focused on the noise, the bills, the pressure, the relationships, the mistakes, the waiting, the uncertainty that they stop noticing the quiet signs of support already surrounding them. The breath they took this morning. The strength that appeared when they thought they had none. The person who called at the right moment. The opportunity that came after a painful rejection. The door that closed before it led them somewhere harmful. The lesson hidden inside a disappointment. The small piece that returned without explanation. These things may not look dramatic. But not every meaningful answer arrives like thunder. Sometimes grace arrives quietly. Sometimes protection looks like a delay. Sometimes guidance looks like a door that refuses to open. And sometimes the hand of God is most present when you are being redirected away from something you once begged to keep. That is the first revelation. What you called abandonment may have been redirection. What you called silence may have been space for you to hear your own heart. What you called a loss may have been the end of something that could no longer carry you into the future. But there is a second revelation, and this one is more personal. The greatest danger may not be that God will let go of you. The greater danger is that you will become so convinced that you are alone that you stop reaching for help, stop believing in renewal, and stop recognizing the good that is still possible. That is why this message is asking you to remain present. Not because heaven is threatening you, but because your attention is valuable. Your choices are valuable. Your inner voice matters. And the story you tell yourself today may influence the direction you walk tomorrow. You may have entered this message expecting a warning. Instead, you may be receiving an invitation. An invitation to return. Not to fear. Not to panic. Not to desperation. Return to peace. Return to honesty. Return to the part of yourself that still believes life can hold something beautiful. Return to the truth that your worth did not disappear when someone failed to recognize it. Return to the possibility that your future is larger than the pain of your past. And if you feel something in your heart becoming quiet right now, do not ignore it. That quietness may be the beginning of clarity. Because the next revelation concerns the one thing many people accidentally release when life becomes difficult. Hope. Hope is not pretending everything is perfect. Hope is not denying pain. Hope is the decision to remain open to a future you cannot yet see. And perhaps that is the hand you feared losing. Not God's hand, but your own willingness to keep holding on. Now listen closely. There may have been a moment recently when you almost gave up on something important. Maybe you did not say it aloud. Maybe you smiled around other people while privately thinking, what is the point? Maybe you became tired of waiting. Maybe you stopped praying because you felt embarrassed to ask again. Maybe you stopped trusting people because too many promises were broken. Maybe you looked at your life and wondered whether anything meaningful was still waiting for you. But what if that moment was not the end? What if it was the place where your old way of carrying life finally became too heavy? What if the breaking point was not meant to destroy you but to show you that you needed a different kind of strength? There is a reason some doors close even when you knock with all your heart. There is a reason some people leave even after promising to stay. There is a reason some plans fall apart even when you did everything you could. You may not understand every reason today. But you do not have to understand everything to take the next wise step. You do not have to see the entire road to walk one honest mile. And you do not have to feel strong to choose not to surrender. This is where the image of Archangel Michael becomes powerful. Strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is refusing to let fear make every decision. Protection is not a guarantee that life will contain no pain. Protection can be the wisdom that helps you leave what harms you. Protection can be the courage to say no. Protection can be the clarity to recognize manipulation. Protection can be the patience to wait before making a choice you may regret. Protection can be the inner reminder. I will not destroy my future because I am hurting in the present. That sentence may be for someone listening right now. Do not destroy your future because you are hurting in the present. Do not send the message you will regret simply because you feel ignored. Do not return to what broke you simply because loneliness feels uncomfortable. Do not abandon your dreams because progress is slower than you expected. Do not decide that your story is over because one chapter was painful. Your emotions deserve to be heard. But they do not always deserve to become your final decision. And now comes a surprising question. What if the thing you have been asking God to remove is not the deepest problem? What if the deeper problem is the belief that you must earn love by suffering? What if you have become so familiar with struggle that peace feels unfamiliar? What if you have been calling anxiety, intuition, exhaustion, loyalty, and self-neglect strength? What if the message you need is not, hold on harder? What if it is, stop carrying what was never yours to carry? You may have taken responsibility for someone else's choices. You may have blamed yourself for a relationship you could not save alone. You may have carried guilt for things you did not cause. You may have tried to become smaller so someone else would feel comfortable. You may have spent years proving that you were worthy of kindness. But your worth is not a prize people get to award or remove. And the moment you understand that, something begins to change. You stop begging closed doors to open. You stop chasing people who only value you when you are useful. You stop calling emotional confusion a spiritual sign. You begin asking better questions. Is this bringing peace or only fear? Is this helping me grow or keeping me trapped? Am I acting from love or from panic? Am I waiting with patience or avoiding a decision I already know I must make? These questions can become a form of guidance. And perhaps that is what this message is truly offering. Not a countdown. A turning point. Not a threat. A mirror. Not the fear that your name will disappear. The reminder that your life still has meaning, and you still have the ability to choose what happens next. Stay until the end, because one final truth is coming and it may explain why you were drawn to this message at exactly the moment you needed to hear it. But first, consider this. There are two ways people respond to silence. One person says, nothing is happening. Another says, I cannot see everything that is happening. The first closes the door. The second remains curious. Curiosity protects hope. It allows you to keep learning. It allows you to recognize opportunities that fear would ignore. It keeps you from turning one disappointment into a permanent identity. You are not the person who always loses. You are not the person nobody chooses. You are not the person whose prayers are ignored. Those are painful interpretations. They are not necessarily the truth. Your life contains more information than your worst memory. Your future contains more possibilities than your current fear. And your identity is larger than the hardest thing that happened to you. If you have been waiting for a sign, perhaps this is not a sign that something terrible is coming. Perhaps it is a sign to stop expecting disaster every time life becomes uncertain. Perhaps it is a sign to check on your heart. To rest. To pray. To speak with someone you trust. To make the call you have been postponing. To forgive yourself for not knowing what you know now. To begin again without punishing yourself for beginning late. Because starting again is not failure. Starting again is evidence that you still believe your life is worth building. And now, imagine God's hand not as something hanging above you, ready to disappear. Imagine it as an open hand. An invitation. A reminder that you can return without performing. You can return without pretending. You can return without proving that you are perfect. You can say, God, I do not understand this season. I am tired. I am afraid. I have made mistakes. But I do not want fear to become my guide. That kind of prayer is not weak. It is honest. And honesty can be more powerful than dramatic words. Because transformation often begins when you stop hiding what hurts. You may have spent so long appearing strong that you forgot how to receive support. You may have become everyone else's safe place while having no safe place of your own. You may have learned to say, I'm fine, even when your heart was asking to be seen. But you do not have to carry every burden in silence. You do not have to become invisible to be loved. You do not have to suffer alone to prove your faith. And you do not have to fear losing God's hand every time you feel weak. Weakness can become the place where you learn to receive grace. Now here is the once-in-a-lifetime realization. The moment you thought you were losing your connection may actually be the moment you were being invited into a more honest one. Not a connection built only on blessings. A connection that survives questions. Not a connection built only on certainty. A connection that remains during confusion. Not a connection that requires you to smile through pain. A connection that allows you to bring the pain into the light. That is deeper than pretending. That is stronger than fear. And that may be why you are still here. You survived moments you once believed would end you. You learned things you never wanted to learn. You discovered strength you never asked to need. And even if you do not yet understand the purpose of every struggle, you are still standing inside a story that is not finished. Do not let one difficult season convince you that the author has left the page. There are chapters you have not read yet. Conversations you have not had yet. Places you have not seen yet. Versions of yourself you have not met yet. And there may be peace ahead that your present mind cannot imagine because it has been busy surviving. So if you feel tired, rest. If you feel confused, seek wisdom. If you feel afraid, do not make fear your only advisor. If you feel distant from God, speak honestly instead of disappearing. And if you feel that you have lost your way, remember. A person can be lost without being abandoned. A person can be tired without being defeated. A person can be uncertain without being without purpose. Now take a moment. Not because heaven is counting down. Because you are worth a moment of stillness. Ask yourself, what have I been holding that is hurting me? What truth have I been avoiding? What part of my life needs care instead of criticism? What would I do differently if I believed I was still guided? Do not rush to answer. Some answers arrive slowly. Some answers appear through action. Some answers come after you stop demanding that everything become clear at once. You may not receive the entire map today. But you may receive the next step. And the next step is enough. Perhaps the next step is apologizing. Perhaps it is setting a boundary. Perhaps it is returning to prayer. Perhaps it is taking care of your body. Perhaps it is asking for help. Perhaps it is leaving a situation that repeatedly damages your peace. Perhaps it is giving yourself one more chance. Only you can recognize which step is calling you. But do not confuse urgency with wisdom. You do not need to panic to make a meaningful change. You do not need to fear punishment to choose goodness. You do not need a frightening prediction to remember that your life matters. Let your choices come from clarity. Let your faith create courage, not terror. Let your spiritual life make you more compassionate, more grounded, more truthful, and more willing to protect the life you have been given. And now the final revelation. Maybe the title brought you here because part of you was afraid you had lost God's hand. But perhaps the message you were meant to receive is this. God's love is not a trapdoor beneath your feet. Your name is not erased because you struggle. Your worth is not cancelled because you are imperfect. And your future is not destroyed because you had a moment of doubt. The real question is not, will God let go of me? The deeper question is, will I stop letting fear convince me that I am alone? Because the moment you stop believing you are alone, you begin to notice support. You begin to recognize wisdom. You begin to see choices. You begin to hear the quiet voice that says, keep going. Rest, but do not surrender. Learn, but do not condemn yourself. Release what you cannot control. Protect your peace. Take the next step. And perhaps that is the strongest message of all. You are not being asked to live in fear. You are being invited to live awake. Awake to your choices. Awake to your value. Awake to the people who genuinely care. Awake to the lessons hidden inside the season. Awake to the possibility that your life can change in ways you cannot yet predict. The hand you feared losing may have been present in every moment you survived. In every time you found strength after crying. In every time you chose kindness while hurting. In every time you stood back up. In every time you refused to become what wounded you. And if you have been waiting for one clear sentence to carry with you after this message ends, let it be this. I am not erased. I am not abandoned. I am not finished. I can return to peace. I can choose courage. I can take one more step. And I can trust that my life still holds meaning. So do not leave this moment carrying fear. Leave carrying responsibility for what you can change. Leave carrying compassion for the parts of yourself that are still healing. Leave carrying hope not as a guarantee that everything will happen exactly as you want, but as the courage to remain open to what is still possible. The storm may be loud. The road may be unclear. But you do not have to decide that the darkness is permanent. Keep walking. Keep praying. Keep learning. Keep protecting your peace. And when fear says, "You are about to lose everything," answer, "I will not let fear write the ending of my story." Because your name is not a warning. Your life is not a countdown. And this moment is not the end. It may be the moment you finally remember. You were never meant to walk forward believing you had been forgotten. You were meant to discover that even in uncertainty, you can still choose faith over panic, courage over despair, truth over fear, and hope over surrender. And perhaps, after everything you have been through, that choice is the hand you are being asked to hold today. But before you move forward, there is one more truth you need to hear. Sometimes the greatest spiritual battle is not the battle to receive something. It is the battle to stop believing that you have already lost everything. Because there are people listening right now who have been carrying a quiet fear for a long time. You may not speak about it. You may hide it behind a smile. You may continue working, helping others, answering messages, and doing everything people expect from you. But somewhere deep inside, a question has been repeating. Why do I feel so far away from the peace I once had? And perhaps that question became heavier after something changed. Someone left. A plan failed. A prayer remained unanswered. A door closed. A person you trusted disappointed you. Or maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. Maybe you simply became tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of waiting. Tired of explaining yourself. Tired of hoping for something that keeps taking longer than you expected. And slowly, without realizing it, you began to believe that silence meant separation. But listen carefully. Silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is where your deepest thoughts become impossible to ignore. Sometimes silence reveals what noise was hiding. Sometimes silence is the space where you finally recognize that you have been trying to force an answer that can only arrive through patience. And sometimes silence teaches you that God's presence is not measured only by dramatic events. It can be found in the strength to continue. In the wisdom to pause. In the courage to walk away. In the unexpected peace that appears after you finally release what you cannot control. That is why this message is not asking you to panic. It is asking you to notice. Notice what fear has been telling you. Notice what exhaustion has been making you believe. Notice how many times you interpreted a delay as rejection. Notice how often you blamed yourself for outcomes you could not control. And then ask yourself, what if I have not lost God's hand? What if I have only lost sight of the ways I am still being carried? That question can change everything. Because when you believe you are abandoned, you may stop looking for help. When you believe your future is already ruined, you may stop making wise choices. When you believe your name no longer matters, you may begin living as if your life has no purpose. But when you remember that your life still matters, you begin to see possibilities again. You make the call. You take the next step. You forgive yourself. You rest. You ask for guidance. You begin again. And beginning again may be the miracle you have been waiting for. Now imagine this. A person is standing in front of a locked door. They knock once. Nothing happens. They knock again. Still nothing. After a while, they become angry. They begin asking why the door will not open. They wonder whether they are unwanted. They wonder whether they made a mistake. But they do not notice that a different path has opened behind them. Not because the first door was meaningless. Not because their hope was foolish. But because the place behind that door was no longer where they needed to go. How many times have you stood in front of a closed door and called it rejection? How many times did you say, "God did not answer me," when perhaps the answer was protection? How many times did you try to return to something that had already taught you its lesson? There are things you may miss even though they were not good for you. There are people you may love even though they could not meet you with honesty. There are dreams you may grieve even though a different dream is waiting beyond them. And grief does not mean you made the wrong choice. Missing something does not mean you should return to it. Feeling lonely does not mean you should accept less than respect. Feeling uncertain does not mean you are moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes growth feels uncomfortable because you are leaving behind a version of yourself that survived by accepting what your future self can no longer carry. That may be the message hidden inside this moment. You are not losing God's hand. You may be releasing the things that kept your hands too full to receive peace. Think about that. Maybe you have been holding guilt in one hand and fear in the other. Maybe you have been carrying old memories, broken promises, unanswered questions, and the pressure to make everyone happy. And because your hands have been full, you have struggled to receive what this new season is trying to teach you. But you do not have to hold everything. You do not have to solve every problem tonight. You do not have to understand every reason before taking care of yourself. You are allowed to release what is beyond your control. You are allowed to say, "I did what I could." I cannot force someone to change. I cannot rewrite the past. I cannot make everyone understand me. But I can decide what I carry forward. And that decision may become one of the most powerful moments of your life. Because the future does not always begin when something new arrives. Sometimes the future begins when you stop carrying something old. Now stay with this message. Because the next revelation may explain why some of your greatest disappointments created the strength you need today. There are lessons nobody wants. Lessons that arrive through loss. Lessons that arrive through waiting. Lessons that arrive when the people you trusted show you who they truly are. You may have wished those experiences never happened. And you are allowed to grieve them. You do not have to call every painful experience a blessing. You do not have to pretend that everything hurt for a reason you fully understand. But you can ask, what did this experience teach me about myself? Maybe it taught you that you are stronger than you knew. Maybe it taught you to recognize warning signs. Maybe it taught you that love without respect is not enough. Maybe it taught you that you cannot keep abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Maybe it taught you that peace is more valuable than winning an argument. Maybe it taught you that you deserve relationships where you do not have to beg for basic care. And maybe it taught you that God's guidance is not always about giving you what you want. Sometimes guidance is about helping you become wise enough to recognize what you truly need. That is a different kind of blessing. Not the blessing of getting everything. The blessing of becoming someone who can choose well. And perhaps this is where the symbol of Archangel Michael becomes meaningful again. Not as a voice screaming that your name will disappear, but as a reminder to stand with courage when fear tries to control you. To protect your mind when negative thoughts become overwhelming. To guard your peace when chaos demands your attention. To choose truth when fear creates